All right, everybody, welcome to the June 21st edition of Downtown Orlando UX. This week, we're really excited to have Matt, the original founder of the group, talking to us. It's been a while since any of the organizers have given a talk. I was thinking about that. We've been trying really hard to get speakers for our events and asking everybody we know if they're willing to come speak and getting people from out of town to speak. And hey, if anybody here is interested in giving a talk, we'd love to hear from you. But tonight, we're excited to have Matt back on the virtual stage this time to give a talk that he recently gave at a conference in Budapest, actually, virtually. I'm sure he'll talk about that. But before we get started, as always, our mission for Downtown Orlando UX is to create opportunities for anyone to learn and share knowledge about the field of user experience. We often have people from lots of different disciplines: product management, design, engineering, and everything in between at our meetup. And we welcome that. We welcome beginners to advanced UX folks, people looking to get into the industry, to seasoned professionals, and we just enjoy chatting about the field, learning new things. And so we're glad that you all joined us tonight to help us with our mission. And this event wouldn't be possible without a big group of organizers. The organizer group includes Abhishek, who's here on the call. Leah and Wes and Nick are out, and then Matt and I are also organizers of the meetup. And we always enjoy hearing people about what you thought about the event, feedback, ideas for topics. Again, if you'd like to speak, we want to hear from you. But feel free to reach out to any of us on LinkedIn or through the meetup page. We'd love to hear from you. And then, as a bit of housekeeping, I know that after a long day of probably being on virtual meetings yourselves, as Matt was saying, it can be exhausting, draining to come to another virtual event after a long day of meetings. But if you can, we'd love to see your faces. It helps us, especially during the parts where we're talking back and forth and having a conversation, to have your camera on. We've got a small enough group tonight to where, like, I don't think we really need to use the raise your hand feature. Feel free to just come off of mute and ask a question if you have one. And then the organizers will keep an eye on the chat too, and relay any questions for Matt during his talk for the end. So if you paste a question in the chat, we'll be sure to make sure it gets answered and addressed without you having to come off mute if you don't want to. And like I said, excited to have Matt Lavoie speaking tonight. This is actually an illustration from one of his articles. He is a champion of UX, has been since he made the transition from front-end development into the UX field at Power DMS. So excited to hear what he has to say tonight about assumptions. So with that, I'll go ahead and stop sharing and let Matt take over.
That is hilarious that you grabbed that illustration. That was from an article about how you shouldn't try to be a champion designer. Actually, it really feeds well into this. But that was the illustration for being the champion designer who goes up to Mount Design and then comes down with the 10 commandments of design etched into stone, with exact pixel measurements of everything that is a requirement for your design. So yeah, it's kind of a funny. Oh, where did you even find that? Did you just Google my name, or?
It's on the internet.
That's amazing. Yeah, that was from InVision, I think. That article, I think, was on the InVision blog, if I'm remembering correctly. But anyway, it doesn't matter. So yeah, assumptions on the road to success or failure for your project. As Jason mentioned, we've got a pretty tight group tonight, so definitely want to make this a little bit more conversational if possible. So feel free to kind of jump in and chime in. I'll have a couple of moments to pause and invite you all to do that as well. But to get started, I know some of you all know me. Some of you know me personally. Some of you are close friends of mine. But for those of you that don't, hello. I have a whole slide here that says a little bit about myself, but before I show the content that I actually just fast forwarded onto, just looking at me, you have formed assumptions about me, right? Like, it is something that we all do as humans. We make assumptions every day, every moment, since the second we wake up, we're making assumptions. It's part of like how we, shortcut our ways to, not be paralyzed by the decision-making process as we go throughout our day, right? You're thinking about like, what kind of shoes do I wear? What kind of outfit? All of these like different things that we are making assumptions about what kind of day it is, who we're going to see, what kind of interactions we're going to have. Are we going to need to run from a coyote? I saw a coyote in the front yard this morning, by the way, for folks that live in Audubon Park area. So that's fun. But anyway, so you've made assumptions about me. So I'd love to hear if anybody wants to come off mute and share any of the assumptions, for people who don't know me, at least, any assumptions that you might have about me.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi. So I mean, just from looking at you, you for some reason you look like the type of person that likes to sing. So do you like to sing?
Do I like to sing?
Yeah.
That's a great, interesting assumption. So you're assuming I like to sing.
Yeah.
All right. What other assumptions are there out there before I answer any of these?
Oh, one in the comment is you like coffee, Matt.
Okay. So I like to sing. I enjoy coffee. What else? Any others?
You're big into science or science fiction because of the rockets behind you.
Yeah, that is true. Okay, that's a good assumption. Cool. So, do I like to sing? I don't. I don't know that I sing. I enjoy singing in the shower. I was in a band when I was in college, and I sang with that. But my singing has been compared to Bob Dylan, so take that for what it is worth. I do love coffee. I'm a big fan of coffee. In fact, I just got a fresh bag of Lineage coffee, and I had some this morning, and it was very good. And the third one was that I'm into science fiction. Well, I actually work for NASA, so that's part of my love of space flight. But I am also into science fiction. In fact, I've got an Isaac Asimov back here, so that's a safe assumption. But yeah, a lot. So intuitively through context clues, whatever, a lot of assumptions were made about me just by seeing me. So here are things about me. You probably could have assumed this. I'm a UX designer, given that I founded the Downtown Orlando UX Meetup. Though when I founded it, I was only just, I don't even know if I actually officially had the title when I started this meetup. Most of my experience is in enterprise, like software as a service applications. I work hard to make a safe spacer for humans. That's my job. Though it is always worth noting, I don't speak for the government or represent anything related to NASA here tonight. I'm just talking about industry experience. So, not speaking on any governmental role here. I'm a dad, so I've got an amazing daughter who is 10 months old. I'm a hobbyist woodworker. And you are also welcome to say hi to me on Twitter, where I am not active at all. So I may or may not reply to you within the next few months, but I will when I see it. So those are a few things about me. And I think it's safe to say that a lot of your assumptions about me probably, as demonstrated, probably weren't off by all that much. Like as humans, we are great intuitors. And we make a lot of assumptions that feed into our intuition, right? And that's not a bad thing. It's just how we work, especially as designers. Now, I gave this talk at Craft Conference as a little bit of an encore presentation. Craft is a software development conference over in Budapest, which I was honored to speak at a second time, which was super cool. I gave a virtual version of this talk to that conference. But as I was preparing for that, I was thinking about like, well, what is craft? What does it mean to be a craftsperson? And I was thinking about it a little bit further. I was kind of framing like, well, what's the difference between being a hobbyist versus a craftsperson? Because I think sometimes it's helpful to frame what you're like, what's it mean to be a craftsperson is a little bit ambiguous, but like if I'm thinking about being a hobbyist versus being a craftsperson, it helps to kind of frame that context for me a little bit. So I don't know, does anybody here have any kind of things of how you would answer that question, the difference between a hobbyist and a craftsperson? I can just keep talking as well. That's totally okay.
Is it, Matt, that a craftsperson is kind of on path to becoming a master craftsman, or like somehow growing in their skill of that area?
I was framing kind of like an expert, I guess, as a craftsperson, like somebody who is like, this is what you do versus you're doing it for fun. Maybe that's another way of kind of thinking about it, is like a craftsperson is, you know, developed in their skill, whereas a hobbyist is maybe novice or junior, or maybe not doing it for pay. I also think a craftsperson has experience, right? Like you have gained experience of you know, like if we think about software craftsmanship, I think you've got experience and you're, you know, able to develop something that is like finely crafted. And when I got to it, and why I kind of framed this talk about assumptions, I think a craftsperson makes decisions with intention and forethought, whereas a hobbyist sometimes kind of stumbles their way through things. So like I mentioned earlier in a slide, I'm a hobbyist woodworker. Oh wait, I've got, so one in between slide here. So yeah, that's kind of what I was just saying. What I was thinking about this talk and thinking, what can I teach you all to make you a better craftsperson for the craft of UX and design. And so, oh, I also gave this talk in 30 minutes, so we'll keep it pretty concise as well. And so I was thinking about being decision makers and the silent assumptions that come into play, and how a hobbyist is going to stumble their way through building something, whereas a craftsperson is making decisions very intentionally and thoughtfully. So how can we banish these silent assumptions and become a more active decision maker? And you may be wondering exactly what I mean by that. So I have this example. So let's say I need a 4x4x1 block of wood, right? We've got 4 inches by 4 inches by 1, and I need that, and I have this, like this big old chunk of wood. So as somebody who knows what I need and I know what I got, I may think, all right, well, let me just cut it here, and I will have a 4x4x1 chunk of wood. And as a hobbyist woodworker, somebody who's kind of new to exploring woodworking, you may just go for it. Great, you've got a saw, you can cut your wood, but what you may not be thinking about is you're going to end up with end grain on top, and your, you know, the long grain of the wood this way, which means that your 4x4x1 piece of wood is going to be very fragile along that end grain, and it'll be very easy to snap that piece of wood. So that may be totally fine for your purpose, but that may not be fit for purpose. And so as we're going in and thinking about how a craftsperson would approach this, you tell them you need a 4x4x1 piece of wood, they're going to think not just, okay, well, I can cut this and get that dimension. They're going to think, what's the best way to cut it? And how do I approach that? How do I apply the expertise that I have? And so they would not make one cut, but two, so that they would get a piece where the end grain is on the end, the short end here. And there's a lot of strength in that cross grain. And I might not even be using the right words for this. I'm a hobbyist woodworker. I made this. It's pretty cool. It's like a little, I made that on a lathe. And you may think like, oh, wow, yeah, that looks great. But like one of the arms is a different length than the other. And, you know, I kind of stumbled my way through this. I was just kind of figuring it out as I went, as I learned how to do wood turning. And that's great, but again, like there were a lot of mistakes that were made in that, and maybe I can see them because I made it. But I am definitely a hobbyist woodworker. I will not sell that, nor do I want to. But anyway, so that's just kind of an example of what I mean. There's a lot of things that are hidden in that, like I need this and I can make this cut to get it, but am I actually thinking through all of these assumptions that I'm making, or not even realizing I'm making in that one decision? So that is all to say that as designers, as people in the software development industry, we are decision makers. And a core, kind of right next to that, we're also decision spreaders. So going back to our 4x4x1 requirement, like if this was a user story, we need that 4x4x1 piece of wood, right? The way that we communicate that requirement, the way that we communicate that user story, we may be writing it in a way that says, cut this here, right? So we may not even be realizing the assumptions that we're baking into what we're communicating with the others we work with, because none of us work in a vacuum. We all kind of are in this space together. And so I think, I don't know, in this talk, hopefully the one big thing that I want to communicate is that like there are all of these silent assumptions that happen in everything that we do. And if we can kind of take a step back and be a little bit more intentional about the way we think about the work that we are doing, we can realize that not only are we making these assumptions, but we're also communicating these assumptions to others. So in a big regard, how can we kind of apply methodical craftsmanship to not just making these assumptions silently or accidentally, but doing them in a way where we're kind of capturing them and understanding them and evaluating the ones that may be very risky to our work. So what can we do? So this isn't like a kind of a scientific, involved process, but generally speaking, I think you can kind of break it down to these 4 big things. So you start by kind of really recognizing that you have a problem to solve, not just a thing to do, right? You don't just need to cut this here, you need a 4x4x1 piece of wood, and kind of getting a thorough understanding of what the end result is, not just like, here's a work step to do, like, oh, put this button on this page that says these words and performs this action. As UX designers, we really should understand like what is the end goal of that user, what is the outcome that they're after, and making sure that we're delivering an experience that's actually like fit for purpose to solve that problem. Number 2, call out assumptions by documenting them. I think this is like one of the most underrated things, and it's such an easy thing to forget. In fact, I am guilty of forgetting to do this so often. But in the work that we do, like, we write feature specs, we write user stories, we write all of this documentation, we communicate in Slack and on Teams and through all of these different avenues with our, cross-functional teams. But so often we forget that, we may be communicating something, even something that we know is an assumption ourselves, but once it leaves our words or our fingers out into the great world, other people may treat that assumption as a fact. So it's so important to actually like highlight those assumptions and say, these are the assumptions we're making, even if you don't decide to do anything else with them other than say, these are the assumptions we're making. So everybody else who touches that project realizes, hey, this is an unvalidated assumption. And it's possible it could be wrong, right? Next, with those assumptions documented, you can take them and you can order them, you can rank them, you can figure out what are the riskiest assumptions here, what are the things that, probably it wouldn't be that big of a deal if we were wrong about. And with those risky assumptions, you can create a strategy, be methodical and thoughtful about proving them either right or wrong. Like, it's really great to be like, ooh, we're assuming this. We're pretty certain it's the way we need to go to solve this problem. But if we were wrong about it, it's going to take our product in a totally different direction than what we're currently going in. So we really need to make sure we're validating it, right? And then I've mentioned this one, but be very cautious when communicating assumptions, because we are not just decision makers, we are decision spreaders, even when we don't realize we're making assumptions. But it's especially bad if you realize like that something is an assumption, you talk with somebody about it, and then all of a sudden you hear from a third person something that's being treated as a fact. That has definitely happened to me before. Back in the old Power DMS halls, I saw that happen more than one occasion. So anyways, a quick aside, it's a very common trap for all of us because we're humans to think that the way that we perceive and understand the world is the way that our users perceive and understand the world. So a very, very common trap for us all to fall in, and I know we all have, because that is just reality, is that we design for ourselves. We design for what we think makes sense. So that'll be another thing that I just want to call out, especially when you're making assumptions. A lot of those assumptions you're making are probably going to be framed around how you would serve yourself in design, how you would serve yourself in solving a problem, right? Cool. So any questions about this kind of introduction to this topic before I get into a couple of real stories about how assumptions have totally led projects astray.
I have a question.
All right, let's hear it.
It's Lauren from Boston. I just commented in the chat saying hello, but hi, it's good. It's great to meet you. Thanks for having me today. So this is touching on the exact issue that I've kind of been working through, which is I'm working with a large team and I'm hearing quite frequently a user like me, like the literal phrasing, a user like me. So what is a tactful way to address those assumptions and just say like you are using the product, but it's not for you? What's a good way to go about it? And there's a tough one.
There's a lot of context that might help me to kind of better answer that question, but I think one of the most helpful conversations that you can have with your team when people are kind of phrasing or framing user stories in the like, it's for us context is just to think about how often you and your team think about the product, right? Like if you're, full-time a designer, dev, QA, whatever it might be, PM on a product, you're thinking about that. I mean, a lot of times in your sleep, but I mean, even in, a 40-hour work week, you're spending a lot of that thinking about this product. And also you're involved in decision making about that product. You're involved in the roadmap conversations about that product. You're involved in strategy about that product. You're involved in the history of all the features you didn't implement regarding that product. And so there is this wealth of knowledge and insight and perspective that you have around why that product exists in the way it does that your users do not have and could never and will never have. And so I think having that kind of conversation to be like, there is no user like you because our users don't work for this company and they don't have the insights that we have. I don't know if that, framing it in that way is, I don't know if it's tactful. I mean, tactful maybe down to the way that you deliver that information, but I think it's honest and I think it's real. I don't know if that's helpful, but that's probably how I would go about having that conversation. It may also be a conversation that's like an individual type one, not necessarily, I don't know, I guess you could share that with a team.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, does that help?
It does help, yeah, it does. And I know it's a common problem, like you mentioned there, it's the common trap.
Yeah.
It's just, like my position is the user researcher, so I want to champion the user as much as possible. So it's kind of up to me to be like, no, we have to listen to them.
I've got, so Jared Spool once said that there is no silver bullet, right? There's that, like everybody looks for the silver bullet in UX. So there's no silver bullet to UX, but the thing that comes closest is FaceTime with users. And I'm not even talking about, necessarily user research, though that's what I prefer as my FaceTime with users is like actually like learning about how they're using the product. But even just like, going to a conference, going to happy hour, whatever with your users can give you a very different perspective than you might have if you don't have the opportunity to spend that time with the people using your products. So I don't know what opportunities you have for, your dev or QA or design teams to sit in on user research or observe in the background, but I found that can make a very big difference for a team's kind of context and perspective as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Of course. All right, let's keep rolling into a couple of stories. I've got two. They are not my own stories, but the first one actually was shared at this meetup. We were doing a roundtable conversation, and I think I'm going to retell this story correctly, but it was many years ago. So if I misquote or misframe the story, I apologize to the original storyteller. But this story is around some bank software. So there's a small regional bank, not tiny, but a regional bank that had a few dozen branch or locations, whatever. And they were working off of some software that was quite outdated. They'd upgraded the hardware, but they were still in the software that was like, black screen, green text. And all of the bank tellers were using it, but there was an issue that they couldn't add new features to it, and it was slow, and they just needed to update the software, right? So they decided to have a design development team come in, design new software, and build it. And the software was beautiful. It was a fully graphical user interface, so no longer just like text on screen, but now there's icons you can click on, there's buttons, and it's a totally totally new UI. And it captured all of the requirements from the previous system. So there wasn't anything any business requirements of the previous system that the new system couldn't do. It didn't like lose any feature functionality. So they finish the software, they implement it, they push it out to all of the bank tellers' machines, and the tellers come in on a Monday and start using the new software. And something interesting happened. It was that every transaction was taking a very long time. And this was odd because the new software was like exorbitantly faster than the old software, right? And so what was really interesting about this is that it was taking a long time because the bank tellers were having to look at the screen. They couldn't just keep their hands on the keyboard. My camera's up here, so you can't see my hands. They couldn't just keep their hands on the keyboard and actually, talk to the customer who was coming up to make a deposit or withdrawal or transfer or whatever kind of bank transaction they needed to do, and use keyboard shortcuts and tabbing through forms to be able to complete the transactions. They had to actually like look at the screen and use the mouse. And one of the things that's really interesting, I think, about this is that in this, total redesign of the software and of this feature set, I didn't think that one of the features of the previous software that maybe needed to be, carried over into the new software was, keyboard shortcuts or, mouse-free navigation. And so I think there was a really interesting thing that happened here, where, you may not think that like, oh, one of my assumptions in this design is that my user is going to use a mouse. Like that may not seem like something that you would think about as you're going through a design process, but I think it's really an interesting story in that one, there's some user research maybe that could have happened that could have identified this hidden underlying assumption. But two, it's just a really interesting, story that like you're not your user, right? They maybe knew that software just as well as a bank teller. Maybe they thought like, oh, I could go stand behind that glass and complete a transaction. But again, day in, day out, you are not having that experience. And so you don't necessarily know what it's like to complete that job, complete that task. And that's actually an interesting one because those users were probably spending much more time with the software than the software design team was. It was kind of an interesting situation. Anyways, so there's a lot of lessons to be learned there. User research, slow rollouts, stage rollouts, a lot of different kind of opportunities to discover different requirements in that regard. But I always thought that was such an interesting story of, the mouse being something that like you could just assume would be used by your users. But if they're going from software where the mouse, wasn't actually a part of the interface, it's kind of an interesting change. So my second story is actually totally different. And this one called the Heat in Haiti. And it's about a nonprofit group that actually went down to Haiti after those very terrible earthquakes that happened probably about a decade ago. I'm not sure when the action was. It was a while ago. Anyways, they went down to try to help rebuild the local communities and kind of contribute to that effort. They did a lot of great work down there, helping that community kind of rebuild after those earthquakes. And as they were sort of nearing, it was probably going to be the end of their time there, and they built great relationships with the communities that they were working in. They were thinking like, what could we do to actually positively impact this community? So they kind of framed themselves with a design problem, right? And they thought through the different possibilities, and they thought about the school, and they thought, it's hot here, and it would probably be really helpful to be able to kind of focus on, the classes and the lessons that are being taught in school if it was a little bit more comfortable in the classroom. So what if we bought some ceiling fans and we installed them in the classrooms for this school? And so great idea, right? And so they proceeded to buy the ceiling fans. They got them ordered and delivered. They went and installed them in the school. And after they completed this, there was sort of a shift, a tonal shift in kind of the engagement they had with that community. They built some really great relationships there, and they noticed that everybody kind of seemed to regard them just a smidge differently after they had done this. And I thought, people would like it. I think it was cool. And they were a bit confused. So they approached one of the community leaders and they asked, like, did we do something to offend you? Was this like, kind of off base here? And the answer they got surprised them in that they'd shared, like, we live in this environment, we're used to the temperatures here, it doesn't really bother us or distract us. So the ceiling fans, they're great, but they're not really the top priority for us. The school that you installed the ceiling fans in, the roof actually leaks. And so when it rains, there's actually building damage happening. And it would have been way better if we had, if you talked to us and we could have, put those resources towards repairing the roof rather than installing ceiling fans. And so this is something that maybe you all can kind of think about, and maybe you've had this experience, I know I have, where you think that the user's problem is X, but really there's some much greater problem, or maybe X isn't even a problem at all for your particular user base. It's just a problem that you framed for yourself. Again, kind of looking at that user in the mirror. So I thought this was a really interesting story. It isn't a story kind of for software development necessarily, but I thought it was an interesting story for just kind of that, like, thinking about the assumptions that you're making towards a design problem, and even questioning insofar as, like, are you solving the right problem? So those are the two stories that I had to share. And actually, I suspect there's probably quite a few others that we all have, even just amongst ourselves. Actually, how am I doing on time? It is 8:11. Does anybody have a quick story that they might want to share around assumptions kind of catching you off guard or causing problems for a particular project you've worked on? And I don't have chat open, so I can't see if anybody's typing anything in there, but I'll take the silence as a no. I know, kind of reflecting back, that this has happened to me in my career many times, where I think assumptions have kind of silently snuck in and caused us to solve things that are just like not quite the right thing. And here, where's I could probably just grab a little bit of space. Here we go. I think something that's really interesting, there's a little bit kind of an aside, but a lot of times I think about, like, user stories are like this goal, right? This thing that you're trying to solve is this goal, and you're this little, like, soccer player, and there's a ball, and you think that, like, okay, let me write this feature spec and hand it off to the dev who's going to kick it, and it's going to go straight into this net, soccer net. And that's great to think about it that way. And I think a lot of us think about, like, oh yeah, like, there's the problem, we understand it, kick this ball, do this thing, add this button, implement this feature. But again, a lot of times we're thinking about, that piece of wood, and we say, okay, we'll cut it here. And we're not necessarily realizing about all of the silent assumptions or unconsidered decisions. Like, there's so many air state things that have caught me or teams that I've worked on off guard as things go into decision making, right? And devs don't necessarily always come and talk to you when things come up. So, like, in reality, it's not just a single kick that gets the ball into the net. That ball is going to go and find some point of friction, and decision making is going to happen, and it is very likely going to go off course, and it'll get past that goal. But, like, is it going to be in there or not is a question. And it may get shipped into production, and that may feel like, you did it, you completed the thing, but did you actually solve the problem that you set out to solve? I think is a really challenging question sometimes. And sometimes we realize we, kicked the ball and it went past the net, but it didn't actually go in. So yeah, I think, again, applying these kind of thought process to the work that we do can really help us to make sure we don't do that. So again, start with the problem, make sure you understand the problem that you're trying to solve, document the assumptions that you are aware that you're making. Do this as an exercise with your team. Validate the riskiest of those assumptions, and be cautious when you communicate assumptions, because everybody on your team is kicking that ball. And everybody on that team is making decisions. So many decisions go into all of our work, even past when we, have handed them off to a developer to work on, right? Okay, so one more thing. We all have biases. This isn't a talk on biases. We've actually had some talks on biases, but remember that our biases can lead to more silent assumptions. All right, so got just a little bit of time. I've kind of I feel like I've kind of gone over this several times in several ways already, but I really just kind of want to talk through that exercise of defining a problem. So for just the sake of it, let's really quickly kind of talk through this. Let's say we've got a new feature request. So sort search results by publish date. Let's say we've got a blog or some sort of resource of articles, and somebody says, hey, I really need to sort these by publish date. Maybe it came up in one of our user research sessions. So me being the dutiful designer, I go in and I file a new feature, say, oh, we need to have a sort. Like, we've got a publish date column, let's just make that sortable. Well, that's great. Job's good, right? Well, maybe not. Maybe we should ask, why does that user want to sort search results by publish date? Maybe the old articles are showing higher than the new ones, and they actually just want to see the new articles on top because they're more relevant, because they contain more, recent content. Or, maybe there are users that are running reports. I don't know why they'd be running reports on our blog articles, but maybe they are. So they want to be able to sort by publish date so that their reports have, information on article frequency or something. I don't know. This is all contrived, so bear with me. So now we kind of think through, how do we define this problem? So how might we prioritize newer content to be above older content in search results? Or how do we get the results the user is looking for in the top 3 results 90% of the time? Parody messers are going to laugh at me because this is a very parody mess example. So next up, we need to make sure we're documenting our assumptions. And I personally like to frame the assumptions as we believe, we expect, we think, because that kind of shows you in the way you've written it, this is my assumption. I am coming up with this. Our team is coming up with this. This is something that, we have not proven, we have not validated. So we believe users want to sort their stuff by publish date, right? So kind of framing it in that way. And I think this is especially helpful to do as an exercise with post-it notes in our virtual remote world. An exercise on Mural or FigJam or whatever can be particularly helpful. But yeah, just kind of framing the assumptions that we're making and that are going into a project. And then finally, ranking our assumptions. So I like to use sort of a risk confidence matrix, but there's a lot of different ways you can do these. If it's a smaller feature, maybe even just a bulleted list where the riskiest assumptions are on top, the least risky on the bottom. But if it's an epic or a giant project, using a risk matrix can be really helpful, because then you can have assumptions that are up here, and we even, for our teams, we even include technical assumptions in this. We believe we need to implement some new technology, with the search example, maybe we believe we need to implement Elasticsearch to be able to get the search ranking that we're after. That's, maybe we have really high confidence that that's the right technology to do, but it's also super risky because that's a pretty big architectural rewrite for our system and our team, and it's going to be months of work. So the risk in time, there's a risk in cost, maybe there's a risk in effort, all of that. Or maybe there's things that you're very confident in that are not very risky. So those post-its, maybe you don't worry about them so much, we're very confident we need to do that, and even if we were wrong about it, it wouldn't really be a big deal. So maybe we just don't look at those or put in the research effort to try to validate those as much. Maybe there's things that you aren't very confident that you need to do, and it wouldn't really be all that bad if you did them or didn't do them. So throw those down there, and maybe those things are things that are bonuses you can investigate and dig into after you've done the things that you're confident in and you validated the things that you're confident in that are risky. And then finally, maybe there are things that are risky, but you're also not very confident that you need to do them, and maybe you just ignore that entire category and say let's just not do those particular aspects of the feature. So yeah, a lot of these can like be, these are things that we need to do. These are things that we need to implement. These are things that we need to prove. But it also can be around things like, these are ways that we're going to authenticate our users. All of those kinds of things that might go into this type of risk matrix. And again, risk, the way that I kind of try to think about it, again, it's like it's time cost, it's monetary cost, it's effort, it's product direction. Like maybe this is a feature that'll take our product in a totally different direction, so that could be risky. Really, I like to kind of think about risk as like, how bad would it be if we were wrong? And then confidence is, again, just like how confident are we that we actually need to do it? So then once we've ranked assumptions, this isn't a talk on user research, but it's really important to validate those risky ones, those like, oh, it'd be really bad if we were wrong about this. So whether that's like, technical proof of concepts or spikes or what have you, or it's user research, or kind of whatever kind of methods that you might be able to do to validate it. Maybe it's building a really quick small prototype to be able to do some usability testing on. Maybe it's just a mock-up, whatever it might be that you can kind of actually validate and either prove your assumption right or wrong. And then yeah, as I said before, be cautious when communicating assumptions, because it's very, very easy to allow an assumption to parade as facts. So I think that's it for this quick little jot through the land of assumptions. And I always like this little image. I had a version of this talk where this was like one of the main slides, and I like keeping it around because it's again, like, if I say, all right, I need my feature is that I need something with bunny ears. Well, that could be a bunny, but it also doesn't have to be a bunny, right? A lot of things have bunny ears. So it's really easy for me to assume if I say I need something in the product with bunny ears, I'm expecting a bunny on the other end, but maybe I'm going to get a TV with an antenna. All right, let's go ahead and jump back over and around, flip it to you all. What questions or thoughts do you have about assumptions, about kind of that very loose process of documenting, ranking, and validating assumptions? Is this something that anybody does in your work today, or something that you all think you could start doing? I mean, like, think about a project you're working on right now. Like, do you actually know, and are you actually confident that you know what problem you're solving with the features that you're working on today or tomorrow? I can also stop sharing so I can look at you.
I have a question, actually.
Yeah.
When you're talking product managers and product owners, do you ever document your risks and your assumptions based on scope? As far as, obviously, product managers are concerned about, well, what's the biggest bang for the buck, right? Mm-hmm. Just kind of curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of different ways to validate assumptions that can help you to scope a project, right? Like you can, even frame assumptions like we believe we're going to need, these X, Y, and Z things in this, feature, in this epic, whatever. And it would be risky because they cost time and effort. So let's validate that we actually need to build those things. And I think that can help frame scope. So maybe you do a Kano model on them to sort of understand, like, are they table stakes type features for this type of product, or are they going to be what's the other side of that? Not promoters, but like are they going to like bring a lot of like different product differentiation to you? Are they going to be seen as really valuable, or are they just going to be kind of like bonuses that people could kind of take or leave, right? It sucks when you spend a sprint working on a feature that's then barely used at all by your user base, and maybe it was something that isn't really actually an attractor. I don't know if that answered your question. That was David, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it does. And I think part of it too is, you know, it's like, depending on how much, obviously resources are always thin, you know, and trying to figure out, okay, well, is it, you know, how much effort is it going to take to turn around something in the whole development life cycle, as opposed to, you know, hey, are you just putting something on a screen, just quick and dirty, or is this something that requires a lot more research and a lot more effort, not only to research, but also to code?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, do we need to, like, we believe we need to build this is an assumption a lot of the times that is worth validating, and probably one of the riskier assumptions, without having like very clear, you know, product research done ahead of time.
Thank you.
I have a story actually that I wanted to share with you guys. My previous job, and this is kind of something that they didn't validate. So the marketing manager, they wanted to make a promotion, and it was several models of this product, of these products, right? And they went ahead and printed all the material, but they never validated the size of the boxes. So it happened. This stuff, you know, I get all the print material in my lab, in my shop, and my job is to kind of write the process for the warehouse people to put all this stuff on these boxes. And here I am, I get this big piece of a label and literature that won't fit in the smallest box. It's just too big. I mean, if you would put the label on the box, you would kind of, there's no real estate. You cover all of the information. And this was just something that could have been simply avoided, right? If they would have validated the sizes that they were going to be making these products for, right? So at the end, we had to kind of improvise. We had to kind of fold stuff over, and inside some of the smaller boxes couldn't get labels. But all of that kind of could have been avoided, right? If we validate, you know, what am I actually going to be putting these things on? So that's a story that I wanted to share with you all.
Yeah, it's amazing all of the assumptions that go into everything that we do all of the time. And it's very easy to kind of make a mistake around that. I mean, again, kind of going back to like even that very first question, like what problem are you solving with the feature that you're working, you know, I don't know, we all came out of work today, probably, you know, had a full day of working on stuff. Like the features that you worked on today that you're going back to work on tomorrow, do you know what problem they're supposed to be solving for your users? Do you know what assumptions you're making in the designs that you're working on right now? Have you written those down? Just do the other designers you're collaborating with or the other designers who are giving you feedback know what assumptions you're making that are being baked into that design? Do your cross-functional peers know? I think those are hopefully questions that if you didn't get anything else out of this talk, just kind of get those to stir a little bit. Think about maybe you know, when you go into work tomorrow, just like look at what's on your plate to work on and think, what assumptions am I making about this? And hopefully that'll bring you a little bit of value, help you grow in the craftsmanship that you apply to the work that you do.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Matt.
Of course.
One more question, kind of around assumptions. I think a lot of times when we think about assumptions, and a lot of the presentation was about assumptions for, you know, choosing a direction, choosing a technical or a UI path for a new feature. It's like the pre-work, the discovery side of the project. What kind of thoughts do you have about assumptions for post-launch, like success metrics? A lot of times it's like, I feel like we're making assumptions even when we're defining those. It's like, well, if we're successful, then 60% of users will use this feature instead of the weak view. I don't know, like, so I think a lot of times we're making things up that are success metrics in order to figure out what we should be measuring. Curious, like, what your thoughts are and the tie between assumptions and success criteria.
Yeah, we have a lot of good talk about success metrics at work and what does that look like? You know, what does it mean to be successful when you ship a new feature into a platform? And I think I'm a really big fan, and it's funny because like this is a good reminder even for myself, but I'm a really big fan of projects that frame out kind of 4 big things. It's what problem you're solving, what assumptions you're making, and of course, updating that assumption list as you validate or disprove them. And then what does the success look like and how do you measure it? And then the 4th thing is like the actual design itself, which is, you know, as a designer, that part matters. But like, you know, the technical design, all of that kind of pre-work, all of that kind of being defined as you go into a project, I think is very helpful. But yeah, I think those measures of success, sometimes thinking about them can help you realize some other assumptions that you're making as well. And maybe that's what you're getting at, Jason.
Yeah, I think assumptions are built on assumptions a lot of times.
Yeah, and it's also gnarly trying to frame like there's this book, it's like I forget what it's called, like anything can be measured, something like that. It's very dry and mathematical, but I think it makes some good points around that, like you can figure out a way to measure anything in an unbiased or mostly unbiased way, but it's just not always easy. So it's worth applying some brain cycles to for sure.
I didn't see any other questions in the chat. Does anybody else have any questions for Matt?
Oh, Aaron mentioned something about success metrics and user spends less time doing a thing. Is it because it solved the problem, or are they just avoiding it? And that's another very quick anecdote. Somebody that worked for one of the travel companies, where they had this button that was like basically, you know, part of the funnel, the like customer acquisition funnel, right? And they're ever trying to get everybody to like click on this button, go through this flow as part of the like booking process. And so they made some design changes to the website, and they hit their metrics like amazing. Like everybody was going into that funnel, but the problem was they were just looking at the top part of the funnel, like they were measuring all the people that went from this step into this step. And then the abandon rate from that step on was like outrageous because it turns out people were confused and were kind of being misled into clicking into that funnel and didn't actually want it, right? So it's like one of those things where rather than like, okay, we hit our success metric here, but we made the whole problem situation way worse. So yeah, exactly what you're getting at, Aaron. Cool. Well, thanks everybody for coming and listening to me ramble on about assumptions. Again, hope you think about it tomorrow when you go into work.
So I'll give Matt a virtual or off mute round of applause. Thanks so much, Matt, for coming and sharing your wisdom tonight with us.